It was crude, ugly, and built from scrap metal. But this little gun armed an empire. They called it the Sten, and it cost less than a soldier's boots, about $10 in 1942 money. No polish, no finish, just a steel tube, a spring, and a stick of bullets hanging off the side. It jammed, it rattled, and it sometimes fired when you dropped it. But Britain built more than 3.5 million of them. And from the sands of North Africa to the alleys of occupied Europe, it became the most recognizable weapon of the underground war. The story of the Sten isn't about craftsmanship, it's about desperation, and a nation that needed a gun it could make by the thousands fast. In 1940, Britain was cornered. The retreat from Dunkirk had left most of its heavy weapons smoldering on French beaches. Factories were still retooling, the U.S. was neutral, and every soldier needed something to fight with. The Army's main submachine gun at the time was the Thompson, imported from America. It was solid, reliable, and ruinously expensive. At over $200 apiece, it might as well have been made of gold. So the War Office demanded a weapon that could be built by anyone: machine shops, bicycle factories, even plumbing firms. The requirements were brutal: simple blowback action, no exotic materials, no complex machining. It had to fire 9mm parabellum, use minimal parts, and be ready in weeks. Britain didn't need elegance, it needed volume. And somewhere inside the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield, two men started sketching on brown paper how to do it. The designers were Major Reginald V. Shepard and Harold J. Turpin, a production draftsman who'd spent years turning ideas into steel. They cut every corner they could. Barrel, simple tube. Receiver, just a rolled piece of sheet steel. Stock, a loop of welded rod. No screws, no polish, no fancy milling. The first prototype fired in 1941, and it worked. Crude, yes, but it spat 9mm rounds as fast as the trigger was pulled. When they needed a name, they took the first letters of their surnames, S and T, and added the place they built it. Enfield, SDN, the Sten gun. The government ordered it into mass production before testing was even finished. The Singer Sewing Machine Company made the first batch that October. By 1942, the Sten was rolling out of factories by the crate, stamped, welded, painted black, and shipped straight to the front. It was everything Britain had asked for: cheap, fast, and deadly at close range. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. The Sten's genius was its simplicity. Mechanically, it's almost nothing. Open bolt, blowback operation. Pull the trigger, the heavy bolt slams forward, strips a cartridge, fires, and recoils. No gas system, no complex locking. Fewer parts meant fewer factories could make it. It used the standard 9x19mm cartridge and a 32-round magazine that stuck out from the left side. That magazine was cheap and fast to stamp, but its single-feed design could be picky. Bend the lips or load it rough, and the rounds wouldn't line up. Soldiers learned to cram 28-30 rounds instead of 32 to reduce jams. Performance was adequate for what it had to do. Around 500, 600 rounds per minute, muzzle velocity roughly 365 meters per second, a weight under 3.5 kilograms unloaded. Not precise at 200 meters, pointless to try, but devastating inside a room, a trench, or a drop zone. There were trade-offs. Open bolt guns are simple, but they can be dangerous if handled carelessly. Early Stens had a crude safety notch. Dropped with a round chambered, they could go off. The Army fixed many of those issues in later marks, but the Sten never pretended to be safer than it needed to be. It pretended to be cheap, fast, and effective, and it was. If the Sten had a secret, it was industrial arithmetic. Design choices were framed around what Britain could actually do under bombing and blockade: sheet metal, rivets, welds, standard springs. Replace milling with stamping, and hundreds of small shops could become arms factories overnight. The first production ran at Singer, the sewing machine plant, in October 1941. Soon, Royal Ordnance Factories, BSA, and dozens of subcontractors joined. Canada's Long Branch plant produced thousands for Commonwealth forces. Resistance workshops in occupied Europe copied the drawings and built working guns in basements and back rooms. Millions were produced across marks. Cost was tiny, roughly 2 to 3 pounds a gun in wartime Britain, which translates to about 10 to 13 in 1942 dollars. By comparison, the American Thompson cost orders of magnitude more. That price difference meant Stens could be parachuted, crated, hidden, and handed out like cigarettes. Popular accounts claim a Sten could be made in 5 man-hours. That's a simplification. The real advantage was supply chain flexibility, a tube and a spring stamped at dozens of shops, then assembled and painted. When production mattered more than polish, the Sten was a machine shop miracle. The Sten didn't stay one thing for long. What began as a very basic tube gun gained small, practical changes. A wooden stock for troops who wanted better control, welded receivers for shops that preferred speed over finish, and stripped-down production versions that traded comfort for quantity. Special versions existed for special jobs. The clandestine teams of the Special Operations Executive used a suppressed Sten that ported the barrel and added a long, baffled can to keep shots quiet for sabotage work. Those quiet Stens would overheat if abused and demanded short bursts, but in the hands of saboteurs, they were priceless. Across the Atlantic and after the war, the basic idea mutated. Canadian production adapted slightly to local standards, resistance workshops, reverse-engineered parts, and late in the conflict, desperate German units produced crude, Sten-style emergency guns of their own. And long after 1945, Sten-type designs turned up with insurgents everywhere from Cyprus to Southeast Asia. If factories made Stens by the thousands, basements and workshops made them by the hundreds. Poland's Home Army and Danish resistance cells built crude copies from blueprints and scavenged parts. The Błyskawice in Warsaw marched alongside home-built Sten pattern guns. Resistance workshops learned to bend sheet steel, weld a tube, and fashion a magazine well. The weapons that came out were rough, often unreliable, but they put lead where otherwise there would be none. Special operations teams preferred suppressed Stens for sabotage, integrally silenced Mark II-S models that traded endurance for stealth. A single quiet shot at the right moment could unmake a railroad schedule or assassinate a collaborator. Those tools were delicate, they overheated and needed restraint. But used well, they multiplied the reach of small, brave teams. The Sten's true magic wasn't in its metallurgy. It was the idea that a gun could be democratized, built by a small crew, dropped by parachute, hidden in a cellar, given to a man who needed to change a moment in history. Every army has stories about the Sten, and most begin with a curse. At Dieppe, 1942, Canadian commandos hit the beach with the new gun and learned its temper fast. Wet sand and sea spray jammed magazines. Some men cleared them mid-fight by slamming the bolt with a boot. Others ditched them and scavenged Thompsons from the dead. In the western desert, crews joked that if you shook the Sten hard enough, it might fire out of sympathy. One sergeant reportedly hung his from a truck mirror as a warning. "Don't bump this, she's loaded." Inside occupied Europe, the same gun became a lifeline. Polish partisans called it Rurowka, the pipe. In Warsaw basements, they welded their own versions from stovepipe steel, test firing into sandbags before a raid. Danish resistance cells built hundreds in bicycle shops. One craftsman etched his initials on every receiver, so Gestapo men would know whose work they feared. And in Prague, 1942, 2 resistance fighters tried to kill Reinhard Heydrich with Stens smuggled in by the Allies. The grenade that followed still finished the mission, but the jam entered legend, a reminder that the same weapon could empower a rebellion or betray it in the same breath.